Howdy, and welcome back to another episode of World Bigfoot Radio.
For those of you who have actually been so super ultra kind as to help this channel directly by donating to my PayPal, thank you very much. God bless you people. I really appreciate all of your help. You guys are keeping the show coming to you and allowing me to continue. I have a noted and famous author on here. He is the author of the book Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And this gentleman has basically taken every interesting conspiracy thing in history and tied them all together. So for you guys that wanted to, have me do a conspiracy show again and talk about some of all these weird connections that are all over the place, this is the man. And I just talked to him here a minute before that we started recording, and he's actually willing to come back on the show, do more shows. So in the future, you will have a chance to get your questions to him. Just send them to me, and I'll ask them to him. But all that be as it may, let me invite on and very warm welcome.
Very much looking forward to the conversation today and hoping that we can bring some different information to the subject matter, and hopefully it'll raise the curiosity with the audience a little bit.
Yeah, this is sort of a different approach to the subject than usual, and one of the things that I'd like to get into first, and this, of course, is like huge on everybody that's interested in Bigfoot's radar, is what are they, where did they come from? And one of my questions for you is that we were just talking about this before we went on the air, the sort of accidental or maybe on purpose mistranslation part of the beginning of the Bible, which makes it seem like there was actually more than one major disaster. In other words, God created the earth, made it all complete. There was a big war in heaven. Angels came down, wrecked up the place. And then after that, they created giants, and then there was a big flood, wiped them out. So my question to you is, in between when God created the world and the angels came down and wrecked up the place, what did he create on it? In other words, did he make races of people that were similar to us but not us? Did he create the pre-Adamites, or do you think that the fallen angels did that?
Yeah, those are some very, 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 very good questions. And so when I start to get into this sort of aspect, understand there's not a whole lot that we can draw on in terms of specific sort of linked evidence. But what I can do is dissect what the Bible says about this time and then match that up with what prehistory says coming out of other religions and the other mythologies around the world. That I think we have to be careful with that term because, in the West, we call them mythology. And, if you say that to the Greeks or the Native Americans, they're going to say, no, that's our history. So
yeah, to them it's religion. It's not folklore or mythology. It's
exactly. And so I want to be respectful of that to both sides, all sides of the argument, so we can start making some connections there, though. And what people don't realize, just as what you're saying, is that you can translate Genesis 1:1 to 1:2 two different ways. You can translate it with the standard dogma that that's when the earth was created, and then you have the 6 days of creation and then the final day. But when you get back into the Hebrew, and in some of the translations actually will have an anecdote that It doesn't say that, the earth was form and voidless. It'll have a footnote that says the other possible translation is that it became formless and void. And then that sort of changes everything, because now you have what I would call the renewal of the earth understanding, where just as in Psalms 104, it says, the earth is renewed. In paraphrasing this, he sends his spirit. And this is the same spirit that we see hovering over the earth at the start of this creation. And so if you actually had the earth becoming void, just as it's described in Isaiah 45, and this is a whole show, so I'm just going to just quickly wrap this up without getting into too many details. God doesn't create anything without a reason, or just sort of out of pride, or in vain, as it says. You take that back, and you're back into Tuhu and Guhu into Hebrew, which is talking about how the earth became void. And for me, this fits better when you have the angelic rebellion, or the God's rebellion, as you have that in other religions. And out of the outcome of this rebellion, you have a destruction of the earth, and then you have the renewal of the earth. And the people who lead these angels are the watchers. And this is very important to understand in terms of how this sort of comes downstream, is that these seraphim angels were called the watchers. And the seraphim angels, as it comes out of Isaiah 6, are fiery serpent angels. So now you get this correlation of all of these serpentine gods all around the earth, and you put wings on a serpent, you have a dragon. So this dragon and the serpent mythology are the ones who are going to produce the Nephilim in Genesis 6:1-4, that are going to totally corrupt and violate the world that's created after the renewal of the earth. And then there's another interesting thing we won't get into about how I look at how the creation of days 4 to 6 compare with the Eden account, and I can't reconcile them. And I don't believe the Bible is in contradiction in any way. So I'm not here to bash the Bible, because I'm a Christian and I believe everything that's written in the Bible, but I can't reconcile that. And so to me, it looks like there's two creations in there. And so now to come full circle, and just by the way, if anybody out there would want some documentation in terms of what I'm talking about in the Eden account versus days 4 to 6, and or in the beginning in Genesis 1:1-1:2, just get a hold of me through my website. There's an email on there, or through Facebook under Gary Wayne, and ask me, and I'll send you those documents. So
I'd also like to add in a quick note here, Gary. If anybody wants more information on the mistranslation at the beginning of the Bible, the tohu bohu thing that we just sort of bleeped right over, go back to the History of the Giants shows that I did, and Dave, the Deliverer, gives a very excellent explanation of this whole thing during one of those shows.
Terrific. Yeah, and it's important to know, so we need to be open for that. So within what is going on in these creation accounts is you have a creation of a number of beings that I call the creation of the Nephilim corruption. And this is not just understood that there were these seraphim angels who created these serpent-like beings that became the kings and usurped the kingships both before and then again after the flood. But also there are accounts of these gods either doing DNA manipulation in terms of how you want to understand it, let's say with the centaur creation in a cloud, which sounds like it's sort of off-world, and either with gods or aliens, however you want to take that. And or with sex with all of these other types of beings that are created that show up all over the world. And the interesting thing is about these, what I call corruptions and violations against the laws of creation, as the first book of Enoch would call it, is that they show up on every continent around the world, in all cultures, in all religions, except for Antarctica. And of course, who knows what we'll find down the road in Antarctica. So there's a commonality that goes back to all of these subjects. And the reason why as a Christian, why I'm open to expanding that type of different types of creations that somehow have a similar sort of root is that I think most people are familiar with the flood story where it says the whole earth was corrupt before God and the earth was filled with violence. And most people just sort of accept that this is the violence that they're talking about. And I would suggest that the whole earth became corrupt just as what it says. It wasn't just violence. Everything is corrupt. And I would spread that to the genome for plants and the DNA and the types of beings that are on the earth. Because if you take that word back to Hebrew, it's 7843 shakaf. And what's interesting about that is it's got the word decay, ruin, batter, corrupt, and completely spoil or pervert, morally corrupt. It's got a lot of Hebrew applications. And when the whole world is that, there's more going on than just the violence. And we have the example of the Nephilim who actually caused the flood, which is why their creation is in the beginning of the narrative of the flood story as part of the cause. And so when we understand that we have these hybrid beings that look like they're procreators, the seraphim, fiery serpent angels, who are also depicted as the kings in so many accounts around the world, we have to start to take notice that there was a large corruption that actually took place. And I know that's a very long answer.
That. You know, one thing that I've always noticed here, people that just sort of lightly brush over the subject, or they just read, you know, the Gen 6 and they go right over it. They don't read your book or anything. There was a thing on giants. Okay, no big deal. Let's see. Angels were mating with humans. They made giants. Got it. There's more to the story than that. Like you just referenced in the book of Enoch, it brings up the fact that they defiled everything. They defiled the fish, they defiled the birds, they defiled the trees, they defiled the vegetables, they defiled the fruit. I don't think they're physically mating with all these things. I think they're talking about genetic manipulation, GMO technology, and which would also explain how all these chimeras came into creation, because if you can manipulate the DNA sequence on any kind of plant or animal, you can certainly create weird hybrids.
Yeah.
Which brings me to another question. I was wondering what your take on this would be. Do you think dinosaurs were GMO creations they made?
Well, again, that's why, you know, it was taking some time in terms of the two different possible creations and the renewal of the earth, and then also another gap. But I mean, when we look at archaeology and we look at science, I don't think they're completely so far off track that you know, when they're dating some of these dinosaur bones. And what we're learning is that these dinosaurs were very much reptilian. Not only just reptilian, but also with feathers, right? So many of them were, and so we're getting closer and closer descriptions back to seraphim, who would have been the ones who were part of the creation perhaps in the first earth, and or corrupted that creation in their likeness again, just as they were trying to do with the Nephilim in Genesis 6 after, in about the 6th generation after the creation or recreation of the earth. And I think, again, that's why I like to have that rebellion back before. I'm not dogmatic on it, and I can go either way, but it just seems to fit better so that you have this whole world of reptilian type of beings after the ones who were probably ruling that world. It just makes more sense, and the descriptions and the parallels to them are just absolutely extraordinary.
Right, and one of the things I always thought about is if you've got these enormous giants, and they did, you know, what are they eating? They need a food source. And if you got GMO technology and you can create 100-ton reptiles running around, well, there's your cattle herd.
Yeah, so, which again is why I'm not too concerned whether or not that the scientists have the dating wrong, and they are just before the flood, and they're part of the food source of the giants, because again, it makes sense. And these animals aren't the normal sized animals, right? Dinosaurs, for the most part, I mean, there's small ones as well, but for the most part, these are giant beings, which makes sense. So whatever they're doing to the DNA of that, in terms of the creation or the violation of that creation, it has a similar effect to what the Nephilim were, because when we're talking about giants, we're not talking about 7 feet tall or 8 feet tall. We're actually talking, you know, even 2,000 years after the flood, where you get almost 3,000 with Goliath. He is 6 cubits and a span, which on a standard 18-inch cubit would put him at 9 feet 9 inches. I would argue he is a royal bloodline. He's from Gath, and probably the king of Gath as a Hittite, as were all of the Avim, Seranim were Avim, Rephaim giants who were leading that city-state at the time and before. And so a royal cubit is arguably just under 21 inches or right at 21 inches, depending on who you're going to talk to. And that's going to take him from about 11 feet 1 to 11 feet 3 inches. And giants weren't thought to be just tall and slender. They're believed to have had a height to width ratio of 2 to 1 versus what the average human would be 3 to 1. So it would be incredibly broad and stocky. And then by that same sort of account, Og's bed, which was made of iron because wood wouldn't support his weight, is again using those two dynamics, and he's definitely a king, so of royal bloodline, so probably a royal cubit, but giving sort of both. You're going to get a height of him somewhere between 12 and 14 and a half feet, because his bed is going to be about 13 to 16 feet. And so again, we get that for a size. And we get an allegory in Amos where these giants were like the cedars of Lebanon. Now, it's a simile, so it's allegorical, so we can't take this as their exact size, because the giant cedars of Lebanon were the giant trees in the ancient world for building, yes, and they grew from 36 to 50 feet, correct, but it's a simile. So we don't know whether or not they're talking about Amorites, who are a diluted form of the giants and an offspring with Rephaim patriarch after the flood. I doubt whether they're 36 to 50 feet, but it gives you an idea that they're talking about them as giants. But the ones before the flood, in the first generation, we don't know how big they are. I think first book of Enoch, we can't really use that measurement. One translation, which is Aramaic, will have it at 300 cubits, which would put them like 450 feet tall. And the other translation, which is out of Giaz, which is the longer translation from Ethiopia, would have that as a measurement called L. And we really don't know what an L is. So again, I'm not sure I'd go so far to say that they were that big, but I think what most people in the field would agree on is before the flood, they were 20 to 40 feet tall. So if you're going to feed these animals, the larger the animal, which is the larger point, in this case dinosaurs or giant animals or bred animals to be larger in that period, would have to be there to sustain the population of these giants. Mm-hmm. Or eating humans.
Well, obviously they were doing that too. That's one thing that it mentions. Is in the days of Noah, it'll be at the end times, and they'll be eating and drinking and given in marriage. Well, what they're exactly talking about is eating flesh, drinking blood, and taking wives that may not necessarily want to be wives.
Everything that happened in the Noah's world, and people will say, well, how do you expand that as part of the end time signs? It's part of the end time signs. And B, the Bible doesn't use words haphazardly. Whether or not this is an English translation or you take it back to Greek, which is the New Testament. And when you look at that wording, it's like the exact same wording when we get the age of Noah in Genesis, where he lives 950 years. It's 350 years after the flood and 600 years before the flood. And it actually says identically the days of Noah. So if you're a Christian like I am, you're going to believe in the accuracy of what Jesus is going to say in the accuracy of the Bible. And now it's reflecting everything that was going on both before and after the flood in the days of Noah, because that's a direct reference. And then everything comes into play, just as you say.
Yeah, I've been taken to task before by people on the dinosaur thing, going, well, why would they make, if I could see maybe they'd make like big, brontosaurus or something like that. Brachiosaurus, there's a big food animal. It can't really fight you back. Lots of meat, but why would they make like a Tyrannosaurus or something? And I'm like, well, look, if you're a 35-foot, really stocky giant, built like a Bigfoot, essentially, we'll get back to that. A T-Rex is 50 feet long and 20 foot tall. That's like a normal human having a hunting dog. It's not really a threat to you. It's probably good at defending your property and keeping the other giants from bugging you. But it's not going to be something like you have to worry about it eating you or anything like that. It's probably just like they had an attack dog.
Sure. And I have a real good analogy because, and it could be that they wanted to hunt these things. Mm-hmm. People can pick who was bigger or whatever. And the analogy would be because so much of this information is always hidden in plain sight with the entertainment. And in this case, if you go to a very similar version, which is the ancient alien mythos, which is just sort of lowers the god level down to very high, intelligent, developed aliens as opposed to gods or fallen angels, you have the Alien movie, which has this sort of almost Tyrannosaurus Rex looking type of individual from the head like, and then you have the amalgamation of this other race that hunts them, right? And they're like a giant being. And so generally when you bring those genres together, what they're telling us is that these monster type beings that were created for the giant ruling class to hunt and for entertainment and for food.
And I could see that. We were doing the same thing back in the Middle Ages. The kings would, have get-togethers with all the other elites, and they'd go out for big hunting trips and stuff. So it just makes sense they do it.
Yeah, and just as Nimrod, is known as the mighty hunter and mighty warrior, they went sort of hand in hand. We all know this as part of our culture coming down through generations, and I think that whole sort of culture of hunting and taking trophies and is something that has come down through history because we've been influenced by the Nephilim and their gods and their culture. We just don't know that we've been influenced to that degree.
Right. Interesting that you bring up Nimrod, who has sometimes been tied in as being or connected to Gilgamesh, and the story of Gilgamesh, which of course goes back thousands of years, like 5,000, whatever. Anyway, he had a companion that used to go on adventures and fight monsters with him named Enkidu, who was pretty much described as a Bigfoot. So, whoa, what's up with that? Tell us, Gary.
Yeah, a number of things, and that you've just opened Pandora's box, to use a Greek metaphor on this one.
I'm good at that.
Yeah, so let's first of all say, let's not compare Nimrod with Gilgamesh. I think Gilgamesh is about sixth generation as you rebuild the Sumerian genealogy, and Murakar of Eridu would be more equivalent to Nimrod. But Nimrod was a mighty hunter. He is said to become a Gibberim, or a mighty one, which can describe a giant, but not necessarily. We also know he's the son of Cush, so he may not be a Nephilim, but something happens to him, and he's closely also associated with the Babel rebellion. But Gilgamesh is the interesting character. And so this interesting character has a friend named Enkidu, and of course, both of these are described as 2/3 God and 1/3 human. And of course, within the epic of Gilgamesh, you have the flood narrative, which is very similar to the Genesis Noah narrative on the flood, on the macro details, but not on the micro details. Because again, Upnapishtim or Ziusudra, depending on which translation you're going to understand that from, is also 2/3 God and 1/3 human, and the absolute archetypical Nephilim to start the world thereafter. And his whole family is also Nephilim of the same description. And of course, Enkidu or Enkidu, depending on which translation that you're going to use on that, and Gilgamesh are created after the flood. So you have a second incursion creation of Nephilim, and you have an ark survival story of Nephilim, which makes it very interesting. And both Gilgamesh and Enkidu are described as very hairy individuals. Now, what's interesting about that is that we have this as a traditional description, one of the descriptions of Nephilim, which makes sense because these guys are Nephilim by the looks of it, or at least a Nephilim type of creation. And as Anunnaki, that would be, to me, a Nephilim. And so we also have in the Bible one particular race of Nephilim that's after the flood, that's called the Horites in some translations, or if you take that back to Hebrew, it's the Horim. And these are very, very hairy Nephilim. And Esau is going to actually marry in with this. Who is one of the sons of Isaac, and who loses the Messianic blessing and the birthright blessing and everything associated that goes to Jacob and then down through Israel in the Bible. But he's also a hairy and a hunter who's going to intermarry with this, and his son Eliphaz is going to marry Timnah from the Horim as well and produce Alamach, which produces the Amalekim hybrids from the Amalekim Nephilim. But the big thing is the Horim, the Horai, as you take that back, were hairy and were cave dwellers, which again gets into kind of a connection into the Bigfoot or the Sasquatch connections. And so, yeah, you have this going on. You say, does that now make a connection to Bigfoot? Perhaps, but I think a different kind of creation, but related in the same type of sourcing.
Well, again, let's double back again now. So, do you think Bigfoot are pre-Adamites, or do you think that they're actually a subsidiary or related race to the Nephilim?
It could be either, but I would look at it from, I would lean towards being a creation similar to the Nephilim. And that would mean in the same sort of area. It could be before. I think they are pre-flood. I think most of these beings somehow survived the flood, and there's lots of ways for doing that. And I think
subterranean, and you're living underground. Well, you can
that is definitely one of the ways. So with some sort of help, they're going to be able to do that, right? Either underground or on arcs or off world, just as you have Amaka Seth, which is again a giant type of being, and another type of giant race that comes out of the tablets of Seth and other Gnostic texts and Gnostic Gospels, who is actually taken in a cloud and off Earth and protected, and then comes back at Sodom and Gomorrah after the flood to begin again the new sort of second incursion of creation of giants. So I'm open to both aspects of that, that somehow they survived the flood, or that they were recreated again after the flood. Because again, we get accounts where you get these types of beings more closely associated with Bigfoot or Sasquatch after the flood as well. So I'm open to both.
Well, interestingly, I've done a bunch of research on this from the standpoint of the Native Americans, and one of my friends is Navajo, and he was telling me that according to their legend, and this would be backed up by just about all the other Native American folklore and their history on the whole thing, that the Bigfoot were here before the natives showed up. But they go one step further and say the Bigfoot were here before the giants showed up. So that kind of makes me wonder what, if anything, the giants actually had to do with them. I mean, maybe that's why I lean more toward, I think probably they're just pre-Adamites. Some of the giants may have survived by going underground. We know that they go underground. They made undergrounds. If they're underground, the Bigfoot were already around here. Well, you're my servant because I'm way bigger than you. You're doing my dirty work. Now I got a house underground. You're my slave in my house underground. Uh-oh, there was a big flood. Well, my slave survived it too. Yeah, and so when you look at from those accounts, it makes again perfect sense, because again you've got with giants a migration seemingly to North America, likely out of the Middle East, and certainly some of the research that's going on now with the red-headed skulls out of South America, and some of the excavations in North America, they tend to have a DNA that sort of maybe goes back to the Scythia region, which is another sort of giant sort of epicenter after the flood and before the flood that has a lot of connections. And
The other thing I would be very much open to is just as you have Bigfoot, that is a significant part of Native American religion and history, they also have and seemingly an association with the little people.
Again, especially in this area, Gary. It's real obvious out here. They're way more scared of the little people than they are of Bigfoot, which you wouldn't expect, but they are.
Because of the technology that they have. And again, what most people don't know is the little people, and they're not in the Bible, but neither is Bigfoot that we can directly point to, but they're in all cultures and all religions and histories and mythologies around the world, and they have the same groups. They have different names for the same beings, but you've got good-looking ones, and you have the mischievous ones. And then you have the ugly ones, and they all have their own particular role to play. And the ugly ones, whether or not we're going to call them gnomes or whatever, they tend to deal in the technology aspect and the genealogy aspect. And what's important, where I'm going with all of this, is that they're closely associated with portals all around the world. Just as you might see and people may not recognize it for what the meaning of it is. It's called a fairy dolmen around the world, and it's like a mini sort of Stonehenge sort of structure. And these are portals. And dolmen, when you translate that, actually means portals. And so what I've learned, and I certainly haven't seen this or anything like that. This is just what I've learned in terms of the research. Is that not only do the little people come through these portals, or the fairy mounds or the fairy shaves as you get into more of the Celtic culture, but so does the Bigfoot, and that's why they sort of disappear. Now, I've also seen research, and again, I haven't been able to prove this, and your people would know way more about this than me, but there's also an association of caves with these portals, which again is that association with Bigfoot, and that these Bigfoot people are also known as, in other mythologies around the world, as the forest dwellers, just as many of the little people are considered forest dwellers as well. So you get this sort of association. So I'm not sure how that matches up with what your research and your people are telling you, but that's kind of what I've come across.
Yeah, that matches up pretty well, as a matter of fact. It makes good sense to me. The one thing that you brought up, which lead us in a direction to another question I wanted to ask you, you brought up South America, Peru. Paraca skulls, which brings me to L.A. Marzulli, who apparently thinks that they are the long necks, the Anakim. And also then that takes you to the latest big thing that's going on with Antarctica, where you've got David Wilcock and Corey Good. And Corey Good is saying that they were finding these Paraca skull guys frozen underneath the ice down there in Antarctica, and some of their old civilization and whatnot. What do you make of that?
And so you're saying they're finding some...
Well, Corey is claiming that they found the remnants of the civilization underneath the ice there, and they're finding, flash frozen mammoths and some of these, huge Paraca skull guys, which... if you look at the Paraca skull guys, that kind of skull looks exactly the same as like Akhenaten and his son Tutankhamun.
Yeah. If anybody wants to look like what a hybrid diluted bloodline looks like, and Akhenaten, depending on where you want to put his chronology, is 1200 to 1400 BC, go to a King Tut museum and go see that Akhenaten sculpture, and it's got that elongated head, and it's got high cheekbones and the protruding chin and the slanted eyes, which is another connection, is that their eyes were thought to glow with the Nephilim, just as you've got different colored of glowing eyes with the Bigfoot. But he definitely has a serpentine look when you look at him from the side and the front in person. And so I don't know what's going on in South America, in not South America, but Antarctica. There is all sorts of speculation and all sorts of reports coming out. What we do know is there's a steady stream of very high level people from all around the world that are going there. So whatever they're seeing, whatever is going to come out is going to change a lot of preconceived conceptions. what exactly it is, I've heard it range from, secret alien bases to waking Nephilim to giant pyramids and all sorts of different things. And it's really tough to know what's going to come out of that, but something to keep an eye on, because it could have a big impact in terms of how people perceive this world, which I think is probably going to happen in some sort of way, and it could be related to Antarctica. As far as what L.A. Marzulli is doing and related to the Anakim, they could be. We don't know that, although the DNA is taking it back to Scythia, as opposed to right to where the Anakim were right in the Covenant land and into the south towards to Saudi Arabia. And Anakim are just a branch name of the Rephaim. You get a lot of these giant names in the Bible. People just don't recognize them as giant names, like the Zamzuzim and the Emim and the Hivim and the Avim, and I won't go and list them all off, but you kind of get the idea.
I've actually done that in a previous show, Gary. The important point here is that pretty much anything that ends in IM, they're related to the giant. Yeah,
you got to be concerned with, and that's why Seraphim as their fathers is an important connection for these particular kinds of giants. And so when I look at what LA is though doing with the red hair elongated skulls, is that that fits well again in terms of what the mythology is on these Mediterranean giants. And in that mythology, whether or not it's in the Greek and Atlantean mythology, or it's in the Tuatha De Danann mythology, which comes again from Scythia, but has a branch that goes up into Norway and Sweden, and the other one is into the Celts, and or in much of the Aztec and Central American history and mythology, is they both kind of say that there was two distinct kinds from this island location, which most people think or conclude is Atlantis. And one variety has blonde hair and blue eyes, which is the Aryan variety that most people would be familiar with. And the other one is red hair and hazel eyes. And of course, they all had pale skin and their eyes shone. So they were a complete assault on the senses, just as they smelled like sulfur or some sort of burning garbage. Anyways, just an awful smell. So I mean, they were an assault on your eyes in terms of what they looked like, in terms of your smell, and the voices that they could bellow, like is described in Greek mythology, like Atlas could, who is also a hero and a Nephilim as well in the Atlantean Greek mythology. So I can't take them back to the Anakim, except that in this polytheist version of giants showing up after the flood, they show up in Scythia and they go south into the Covenant land and north and northeast and northwest, and that's where the migration theory comes from, of these red-headed ones, perhaps coming from Ireland and the Tuatha De Danann, which is the same genealogical source, went to North America and went to South America.
It's interesting that the part of what the tribes say here in North America seems to back that up 100%, because they have, some of them have specific names of specific giants that they still remember, and they've got descriptions of these giants. Yeitzo, who like to bully around and eat the Navajo. And some of these other guys. And it's interesting how often that it comes up, well, what did they look like? Well, they had red hair and they had pale skin like white man. And that comes up over and over and over again.
I've not read of any accounts in North America that aren't red-headed and pale-skinned, although when we get into Central America, you get some Black African statues of possible giants, but those could also be pre-flood too, so it's hard to know. But generally, it's the red-headed variety, and the blonde-haired variety seems to be more into Central Europe and into Russia and into Sweden and areas like that.
So do you think the redhead gene in the humans is actually genetic passed down? because it seems like redheaded people are a little bit kind of out there sometimes, and they've actually done some research on that, and there is scientific research to back up the fact that people with red hair have a worse temper and tend to go off more often. They've actually been able to verify that.
Yeah, I have tinges of red hair. I have very pale skin. I could attest to that.
I can't tell by your picture, Gary. It doesn't show much red hair.
Yeah, well, it was not totally red, but I have a lot of red hair in my family, but I had streaks of red hair that would shine in the sunlight. I come from genealogies from Scotland and Ireland, so and my brother asked me one time, he says, "Do you think we're Nephilim?" I said, "Who knows and who cares?" But
I would have said, "I hope not," but
I hope not. But yeah, I think there's a lot to that in terms of that sort of nature, and certainly in Ireland, you only really hear about the red hair and hazel eyes. And just sort of interesting tidbit is when we look at all of the vampire mythology that's out there today, and we look at Dracula, who is based on Vlad the Third, he is a noble Celt, as he goes back, and his genealogy is also back to Scythia as well, taking those genealogies on the way back, just as Prince Charles says he's a descendant of Vlad the Third, by the way. But anyways, this guy had pale skin, hazel eyes, red hair, was educated at the mystery school in Vienna of Solomon, and this is who Dracula is based on, is the same type of description, and the blood drinking is a very typical Nephilim description. And it's thought that the Nephilim were drinking and taking the blood of humans, and they call it starfire or vril in that sort of mythos, to either extend their lives, that they had lost their immortality, and also to gain stronger cognitive advantage. And what's so important to understand about this is that this vampire allegory that has become a genre in itself is Dracula means son of a dragon. The A is son of Dracula, and Dracul is the dragon part. And again, we talked earlier about the Nephilim coming from seraphim angels, which are an angelic dragon as opposed to a physical dragon, when that's another interesting story in itself. And that the Nephilim were the offspring of these seraphim angels. And this is in allegory in terms of the purebloods of the Nephilim as they come down through history through the royal families. Dragon and raven is the allegory for the patriarchal bloodline, and fairy and owl is the allegory for the matriarchal bloodlines.
Interesting. Well, one thing about the Dracula, his father was the head of the Order of the Dragon, and the Order of the Dragon was charged with chiefly keeping the Muslims out of Europe. Let's not go any further with that one. But that's sort of why he had huge fights with the Ottoman Turks and sort of lured them into his territory so he could hand them their own butts and chase them back out again.
He was a very venerated bloodline of kings, and the son was actually inducted into the Sarkani Rond, or the Ordo Draconis, that was formed to retake the European kingships and put their bloodlines back on, and to, as you say, the greater defense of Europe from the Muslims.
Yeah, he was trying to get the king of Hungary to back him, to actually give him some military aid to help fight the Muslims. And he went, "No, I don't want to get embroiled in this. I got problems of my own." And so they sort of left him out to dry. And actually, the king imprisoned him for a couple of years before he put him back on the throne again. But it's really interesting that to go back to the L.A. Marzulli thing, I think where he came up with Anakim, if I remember this correctly, is he was talking about, he had shown the red-haired, elongated skull, what do you call it, the conehead guy, to an anatomist, and her comment on what was, with this insertion point in the skull and the shape of the skull, this individual would have had to have an extremely long neck. And then he went, bing, oh, Anakim. That means long neck.
Yep. Well, and all of the Rephaim after the flood, and they all go back to the Rephaim after the flood. have particular descriptions for that name. So Raphaim, it has a few different meanings as you take that back to Hebrew, but that's going to be like the spirits of the deceased. And then that's because it's believed that the spirit of a Nephilim spirit doesn't die when the body dies, and it's not allowed into heaven, and it roams the earth as a demon until the time of judgment.
That's what,
right?
My former guest Dave believed too, and he was, like I said, he was an exorcist. He got rid of these things.
Yeah, but
that's
Anakim,
exactly what they thought they were. They were demon spirits left over from the Nephilim that are still walking around causing trouble.
And that's exactly what Enoch says. And I have a document if somebody wants to look at a biblical case for demons and linking them back. I have that all as a biblically based document for people if somebody wants to get a hold of me on that. And the Anakim in the book of Deuteronomy are called Raphaim. And all of those are taken back to the root name Raphaim, just as Og was Raphaim. And you also get Genesis 14 as a Raphaim nation that's part of the War of Giants. And so even though it seems like Anakim and Avim and all these other names were vernacular names for the Rephaim. So certainly
like
Anakim.
Tribes or certain types.
Yes, yes. But all of them are believed to have long necks, is where I'm going. So again, when you see, in terms of these giants. And so when you see these reliefs and these pictures of the Egyptian ones or wherever, they all tend to have a little bit longer neck.
Right. Well, I think the other tie-in there is you look at the long skull and they say, well, it's long necks, and then you look at the picture of like Akhenaten, and then those guys go, well, they got those same weird skulls and they got the long necks too. They do.
And a lot of people say, well, anybody can create a elongated skull. You just have to wrap and bind the heads from birth.
That doesn't increase the interior capacity of the skull.
Exactly.
They have a big interior capacity, a lot larger than human.
Yep. Binding will not increase the cranial capacity. And the second thing you can't do is get rid of the human sutures, right? So these elongated skulls don't have those same sutures.
Right. A third thing that LA brought up that most people don't mention is the insertion point where the spinal cord actually went into the skull is in the wrong place. And how do you modify that with mortarboard?
Yeah. And so Josephus, when he described these beings, and he actually describes these bones still being on display in his time, and he grew up in the time of Jesus and part of the Roman diaspora, and he's actually captured by the Romans, and he writes the history. But he said these bones and the anatomical structure was completely different than that of humans, and that people would come to see these bones because they were just amazed by the size and the differences.
Wow. Now, another thing that comes to mind, and I talked to Dave about this quite a bit, and he was sort of interested in the whole thing, that according to him now, in the post-flood narrative, the word Nephilim doesn't actually come up. The giants are referred all as Rephaim after the flood. And he did some research on that specific word, and he thought it sort of carried less of a connotation of them being risen as more of a connotation of them being risen from the dead, undead, basically.
Yeah, interesting. Just a bit of a correction. Nephilim does show up after the flood. Okay. Nephilim only shows up 3 times in the original Hebrew, once in Genesis 6:1 through 4, and then 2 times in the same verse in Numbers 13:33. Now, he is correct, and I agree on the idea that Nephilim aren't after the flood, but it's replaced by these Rephaim characters for a couple of reasons. So here's the reasons why. One is that the Anakim, who are described as the descendants of Nephilim in Numbers 13:33, and Nephilim goes back to the giants go back to Nephilim in that passage in the King James Version, and it does show up there twice. But we also know in Deuteronomy, as I mentioned earlier, that the Anakim are considered Rephaim. Mm-hmm. Now, this reference to Nephilim that's twice is in the evil report that is being given by the spies who don't want to go into the covenant land and take the land because they've seen Anakim there, and they say they're the descendants of the giants. Now, there's a few other exaggerations and lies that are in that report designed for people not to want to go in, which they didn't. They were so afraid. So it's not that the report that's listed before didn't say there were Anakim there, and it's not that Deuteronomy 1 doesn't restate that there was Anakim there. It's just that the idea that we have to be careful of is that because they were called the descendants of Nephilim may not be accurate. It could be an exaggeration, but it does show up. But Deuteronomy is very, very clear that the Anakim were called Rephaim. Now, for the Rephaim showing up after the flood, and because of the spirits, I mean, one might think that the demons could take the bodies of humans to possess, which demons do, but that's never a symbiotic relationship. The only symbiotic relationships we see in that is the avatar effect. That's where, like, the god Vishnu would be an incarnation into Nirashima, for example, or into Buddha, the 4th and 10th incarnations. But that's a symbiotic relationship. It doesn't sort of tear the person apart. So I'm not convinced that these are the original Nephilim spirits creating these giants, because, again, if they're just going into a human, then they probably wouldn't be a giant. So I tend to lean on, my favorite position is there is a second incursion either at Mount Hermon or at Sodom and Gomorrah that recreates these giants. They're not created immortal and in the same size as what is created in Genesis 6, but we do find these giants showing up after the flood. So they either survived or they're recreated. I just lean on recreation because it fits so much more with what the Bible is suggesting. But we don't know. That's the bottom line, right? We don't exactly know because we don't have a smoking gun as to a verse that says they were created after the flood like they were in Genesis 6, except that there's the wording in Genesis 6:1-4, it says that they were created at that time and then afterwards, and we don't know when afterwards is. Could be several creations of giants before the flood, or again, they were created after the flood as an explanation, but it's not crystal clear that we can take that to the bank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, he was sort of the opinion that there was the pre-flood Nephilim and the post-flood Rephaim could at least be differentiated by size differences, because it seems pretty clear by the text that the ones before the flood tended to be quite a bit larger than the ones after the flood, wherever they came from.
I do agree with that. So with this second incursion idea is that they weren't able to pass on the immortal spirit and not able to create quite as large ones, even though they were still giants. And then if you get into the Ugaritic texts, you have references to the Rephaim, and there's also an ancient site called the Gilga Rephaim, or the Wheel of the Rephaim, or the Wheel of the spirits of the Nephilim. And in Ugaritic texts, it talks about these Rephaim people who can go between different worlds in a spiritual sort of sense, and they cross back and over. And we don't really get an explanation as to what that really means, other than they're spirits that can cross through different worlds, and they're called Rephaim. And that is likely a pre-flood site, although a lot of people argue that it is also post-flood, but seems to me it seems to be a little bit more ancient than that. And we get connections. One connection in the Bible in Ezekiel 38, where it's talking about the mighty ones, which goes back to Gibborim, who. I'm trying to remember the exact wording on it, but the understanding here, and Mike Heiser explains it quite well, is that these mighty ones are the ones, as it's talked about in the King James Bible, are the ones that cross over. And that's another connection back to, is this mighty ones or Gibborim talking about the Rephaim, and is that connected to the Rephaim that are mentioned in the Ugaritic texts?
Interesting. You know, one thing you mentioned earlier about the dolmens and the connection to the fairies, we also have the fairy mounds and all that sort of stuff, connections to the fairies. But the thing that I I find in my line of research is that the same sort of thing applies as a connection to the giants, because almost every place on Earth that you find megaliths, you ask the people there who made these, they say, well, the giants built them before we got here. And the same thing seems to apply to most of the dolmens. They've all got legends. It's like, yeah, well, the giants had something to do with it. So there seems to be this connection of the little people and the giants to these things. And just as an interesting side note, the largest dolmen on Earth is right here in Montana. The Tizer Dolmen, 60 feet tall at the Giants Playground near the capital, Helena.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and why would it be here in Montana? Like there was a whole lot of megalith builders here? No.
Exactly. Or you get the walkway of the giants in Ireland, and at least you understand that there was a rich history of those giants there, and they're building megaliths over there. But I like that connection about the fairies because, again, with these different types of little people, they seem to be part of the same sort of culture before the flood in all these different civilizations that were there. And they all, as I said, specific roles to play, just as a dwarf would be one of the ones that would make the weapons and utensils,
Right.
and the gnomes
protect nature, and et cetera.
Yeah. So they're all created, and they all tend to have this connection back to being created by the gods who mated with somebody. But these ones, I mean, they're created small. So I looked at these are more of a people that's created more through DNA manipulation than what maybe the Nephilim were.
Yeah.
Because and again they don't have the same look, but we also get other interesting beings like the centaurs. That's half man and half horse, right? And
Chimeras.
And chimeras, and created in centaurs created in a cloud, as if it's a DNA manipulation. And you also have Pegasus, and you also have mermaids, and then you get into things like what gods like Bast did out of the Egyptian pantheon, which that movie Panther is based on, and Bast is a lion god. And of course you have lion men of Moab as Nephilim, and lion men of Gad, and you've got all of these other different sort of lion men that are on reliefs that are all around the world, and they were a warrior class and fighting just like the Nephilim were, and they had lion characteristics. And then you have the Tengu offspring of the gods that have this raven or bird face.
Welcome back to another episode of World Bigfoot Radio.
Yes. In the Ramayana Sanskrit epic going back 6,000 plus years, there is the story of Lord Rama and how his ootsy cutesy girlfriend got stolen by the demon lord that ruled a nearby island, the demon lord Lanka. The island is named after him. It's called Sri Lanka. Anyway, Lord Rama did not have enough boats to float his army across to Sri Lanka and attack this jerk and get his girlfriend back. And he did not have enough vimanas to make an air force to fly in an army to attack this jerk and get his girlfriend back again. So he was sort of in a quandary as to what to do, until his allies suggested to him that they would build a bridge for him
between India and Sri Lanka, and then he could just march his army across it and invade them all to his heart's content. And he went, well, that sounds like a great idea. Is there enough of you guys? Oh yeah. We'll get our buddies from all over the planet to show up and help you here. Don't worry about it, Lord Rama. We got you. So if you go and look at the Sanskrit, what are the Vinara? Well, they've got all these intricately carved stone temples and stuff. And go see Praveen Mohan's channel. He'll show you all that amazing stuff. You got like 3 million subs. Guy's absolutely spectacular. And he has pointed this out in the past too. What is this Temple of the Monkey God stuff with all these Vinara people on it that look like monkeys? Those are Bigfoot. And they actually did them wrong on the temples, and he's pointed this out too. Some of the temples that were made within the last 1,000 years or so, they portray them as something that looks like half a human and half a monkey, and it's got a monkey tail. And he said, but that's not how they're described. And I went, wait. And I went and looked it up again. And I actually found a conversation with 2 experts on Sanskrit that were talking specifically about the Vinara and how that had all been mistranslated. And yeah, it doesn't say anywhere in there that they had tails. Here's the description of the Vinara. Vinara in Sanskrit literally means forest people. And what do these forest people look like? Well, they don't wear clothes. They're covered with hair, and some of them are the size of elephants. Does this sound familiar? So anyway, the Vinara, clearly the Sasquatch, build this huge bridge across from India to Sri Lanka so that Lord Rama can go get his babe back again. And they go one step further and they say, hey, we hate the giants. Can we join up with your army and massacre those bastards? And he's like, yeah. Gives them the high five. So they build this big bridge, and according to the epic, the bridge was supposed to be about half a mile wide and about 10 miles long. And then they all invade, and they kill all the giants, and they get his girlfriend back, go back to the mainland, and they all lived happily ever after. So this is all a great story. It's a great story, except for the fact that they were doing some satellite scans on the Bay of Bengal, and they found what looks like an old bridge buried underneath it that went from the mainland to Sri Lanka in exactly the same place that what they called Adam's Bridge was supposed to be. So having found this from satellite, they got extremely curious, and they sent a scuba team down to investigate, and they came back looking perplexed, going, I don't think that's natural. Then they sent another scuba survey team down with archaeologists that spent about 2 years working on it and filed a report on it and came back saying, this thing is constructed and it's been here for at least 6,000 years. And there's your report from over 6,000 years ago of the Bigfoot invading Sri Lanka and killing the living crap out of all the giants there.
Wow, that is actually a great story.
Welcome back to another episode of World Bigfoot Radio.
Once again, we got with us somebody that y'all been clamoring to have on the show again. And in case you missed it, he and I were both just on Spaced Out Radio at the same time last Friday and totally took over the show. As a matter of fact, they didn't even do the news afterwards. They just let me and Caveman keep blabbing away. And if you haven't already heard Caveman, there's a quick way that you can get caught up on a lot of the stories and adventures that he's had, and even a couple new ones. And tonight we're going to be talking a little bit more about his background and some of the history of the Navajo Nation, which people don't usually get to hear about. And so with that, let's bring on our guest for the show, Randy Caveman Yazzie. Welcome to the show, buddy.
Hey, man. How's it going out there?
Loving spring. We're finally starting to get leaves coming out on the trees up here. That means it's almost time to go look for the Bigfoots.
Yeah. Time to get a thicket in there.
Yeah, well, I'm looking, when I go look at the mountains across the valley from me, they're all covered with snow still. And if we want to go where they are at, you've been there before. You imagine trying to drive up that road when there's snow on it? There's a reason they keep it closed in between May and October, so insane people don't try it and fly off the cliff, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
down here, it went up all the way up to 89.
Wow. You guys had a hot day today. We hit 76, which is the second day in the 70s we've had so far this year. So it's nice. It's actually starting to get warmer again.
Yeah.
That's why the leaves is coming out, and they're like, "Ooh, spring finally! Let's
Start
come
it.
out."
Down here, it's just what we have as greens is tumbleweeds growing out now. So,
Oh,
they
okay.
turn really green. They get about maybe 2.5 feet, or some of them even bigger, and it turns green all of a sudden in August when the cold air swifts in. It just turns all of a sudden, just turns brown, and then
Dies.
they start racing with each other with each other down the road. You see John, you see
Racing the
John
road
Wayne,
runner.
or
Yeah. Racing the road
yeah,
runner down the roads. Yeah, I was
yeah.
in Wyoming one summer, and they had plenty of tumbleweeds blowing around there too. It was the first time I ever saw them, and I was like, "Well, that's novel." They got plants here that just break loose from the ground and fly around and crap. They don't have anything like that where I came from.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. But anyway, yeah, one of the things I wanted to bring you on for was to update everybody on. It's been almost a year, I guess, since you've been on the show. Anything interesting and Hosteen related that has either happened with you or with people you've done investigations into what's happened with them, or they need your help or something like that, and then we can go on to something about your Navajo history. So take it away.
Oh yeah. Last night was the recent one for myself, and it happened on the south side window, and it's like a 3x4 window that I have in my room, and uh, at first I was just watching TV, and here I noticed that the motion light kept coming on, and there was the dogs were outside. There's like one, two, three, four, five of them outside, and they usually lay in the front, or they'd be doing their own thing out there. And I noticed that the motion light was coming on, like I said, and here all of a sudden I think they detected it, that the light was coming on, and then it would go off after a while, and then it come back on again. And one goes back there and runs back yelping, and then all the other ones, they took off that way. And I was thinking, I have some stupid dogs. There's some smart dogs out there that run from danger. My dogs, they run towards it and start like saying, hey, you get out of here, or something like that. And they're all barking at whatever was coming around. And I ran outside, and I looked that way. I didn't see nothing. And here they kept barking beyond where it goes down the hill. And they ran that way, and I came back walking in, and then they came back, and then they kept looking back there. In fact, they were at the corner of my house. There's like a plain view all the way on the south wall, and they were laying there looking that way. It's just like, oh, you stupid dogs. When are you going to get torn apart or stolen, get taken, and all of that? So they just sat there, and then they laid there, and in the morning time, 4 o'clock came around. I looked over there; they were still right there. So in the evenings, they bark towards the southwest, which is where it goes downhill. So that's what they do. My dogs. The other one, the big one, is just laying from there. Didn't care. What happened to the other one. She was just laying back there. Just licking his lips. So that was it. So I got some stupid dogs that run towards danger, just like I do.
Either that or they're really brave dogs, one or the other.
Something
Insanely
like
brave.
that.
Now, I've had other people tell me that about the dogs too. I know one lady that goes out and walks around the woods and films them, and she has her dog with, and she says when they're nearby, she can't smell them yet, but he can, and he'll start licking his chops, like he's trying to get that icky smell off
Yeah.
Chops. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard people say that, their dogs got scared and they started going for the door, the entrance, and going inside. And here, my dogs are just like, I had the door open, but they're running the other way. So,
Well, they're pretty brave. Now, are these the same ones that used to let off the chain?
the one of that one of those, yeah, just one, that one big dog, half coyote and half German Shepherd. She's the one that's, just laying back there, like all this commotion happening in front of her, and she's just there, just licking her lips. Those other smart other smart dogs, they run for the door and go inside. But my dogs, they run towards that, whatever is outside.
Well, at least they ain't being darn traitors like the other ones that would go play with the boogers and they'd let them off their chains
Yeah,
and stuff.
yeah, they would run off with them, probably like play out there with them.
Yeah, they probably started showing up and giving them bribes so they wouldn't bark and they could sneak around your damn house all the time. They didn't have to worry about the dogs giving them away. I know how those cheaters
Yeah,
work.
yeah. I've had that, that's a good point. These dogs that I have are like the new ones. The new ones that are on the block around here, and the other one is just laying back there, they, just back there. She's one of the ones that they used to play with. I don't know, the hot
She
thing
like
comes around.
she knows better. Oh, if you don't go bark
Yeah,
at us, we'll show up and give you a treat later. Okay, I ain't barking. I'm just gonna lay here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Waited to get the taken off the chain and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, them other ones can stay on the chain. I'll let you off. You gotta start
Yeah,
watching. If that one dog starts getting let off the chain and the other ones aren't, you know what's going on.
yeah. That was the reason why I put up that motion light back there. I wanted to know when they came in. They right now it's 10:42, so they they come in the evening at dusk. Some of
Yeah.
those, they come in at dusk, and then they'll be sitting on the hilly part, with where all the bushes are at, and they slowly, just come in.
Well, how
That's
far
what
is
they
it
do.
from your house to the edge of the big embankment going down to the wash there? That's
Uh,
not very far, is it?
that's it's not pretty far. I'd say about maybe 100 feet or something like that.
Yeah, that's like nothing, man. They could sneak right up to that embankment, peek over, and see what's going on over at your place.
Yeah, yeah. You seen the lights I put up, right?
Yeah, oh
Like you said,
yeah.
it,
It looks like a
it looked
military
like
compound in Afghanistan. Got so many lights on.
yeah, so many lights, floodlights, and all of this, and they're still coming. So that's how they are. And my stupid dogs, they're just all, like you come any closer, we're gonna still bark at you until Randy comes out or something like that. And those smart dogs that I hear people have, they have, they run for the door and they go inside. They get let in, and the danger's outside, but the dogs and all the family members, they're all inside. That's pretty smart. Well, here my dogs are just out there, hey, 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 really barking away.
Hey, Randy, there's one over here. Come out and make a stink about it. It's this way. Bark,
Yeah,
bark, bark, bark.
yeah. Even, I have my cats right out in front, kind of like halfway in between the corner of my east wall and my door. My cats are right there, and my cats are making a ruckus. Hey, rah, or whatever they say. Everybody else, all these animals are making sounds like there's a monster out here. And then, I walk out. And then that's the one thing too. When I walk out, they look at me. And then I start walking towards them. That's when they start to get up again, and then they run after. By that time, I think that their house team's like running away or walking away, and here they run after them.
He's like, oh crap, Randy's coming out. He'll try and take a picture of me. I better get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah, the Hosteen will be thinking that, but then the dogs are like, hey, he's coming, let's go bite that other one or something like.
Now, you told me that there was, mostly you've been involved in doing stuff in school, so you haven't really had much time to do investigations, beyond your own little area. But you've had a few other reports, and you were telling me the other day about one where a lady saw a gigantic white Sasquatch there.
Oh yeah, that happened about 2 years ago. She keeps telling me, I keep telling you, you're not saying anything about it. And that's my one of my aunties that's in Arizona. She says that. I keep telling her, I said, what am I going to do about it? It already happened, and you will be out there looking at the shade house, like finding Bigfoot or something like that. The hot scene's already gone, and we're still investigating 2 years later.
Yeah.
So,
Well, then have
what
they
she
seen him at all since, or has there been any other activity, or was it just a one-time
they
sighting?
that's my uncle. My uncle tells me that they always come up from the wash that we used to live by, and we're like the last line of defense, so to speak. We're the ones that's closest to the wash,
Right.
and that's where I grew up, and they used to come up from there. But I only seen black ones. That was it, and they would just walk right alongside the wash area, and then they continue on. They would walk up, and then they just walk on that side. Just take a 90-degree turn and just walk off. And that was all they did. But I guess this one my auntie saw was that this was further in, and it was standing by the shade house, what we call it, and it's all made out of leaves and woods and all of that. It's a square structure, and it was standing by it, and it was those structures that they're like about 9 feet high, and there's right around there, that people just put it together like that, all square. But she said early in the morning, around 8 o'clock, was just what she said. She says, I was going outside to dump the water, and the one I washed up, and I threw the water out, and I happened look to the south, or not to the south, to the north, and here there was something that was standing right by the shade house. Just here's the shade house, and then it's just as tall as the shade house, and it was just at the corner, and I guess it was just peeking out like this. But its hand was like right there, right where the top of the shade house was,
Oh,
and it was just like that. So she looked at it. She wasn't even really into it. Like didn't really understand what she was looking at. And then she kept looking over there, and then she cleaned out her pan, her wash pan, and then she looked back over there, and that's when that thing moved. Stepped forward because it was looking back at her, and it moved. It made a step forward, and that's when she knew. That's when she found out that it was just in the really, found the size of it and how bulky it was, and it was all white. So it walked out kind of like halfway out in the clear, and she just bolted inside. And she said she ran inside and locked the door and ran to the bed, crawled under the covers, and covered her head. And all that time, my uncle was playing solitary right there.
oh God.
What's going on? He says, there's a monster on that side of the in our neighborhood. There's something white. It's real big. It's as big as the shade house. And then she described it. And then he says, oh, okay. And then he continued on playing. And here, I guess she kicked up the cards from him.
Because she wasn't getting his attention fast enough, so she upset the card game.
Yeah, she just kicked those cards, And then he stood up, walked outside, and then he looked around, and he told him, where did you see this? And then I guess she was still under the covers talking to him. It's on that side of the house, the square house with the shade house in front of it. So I guess my uncle kept looking over there. There's nobody over there, nothing. It's probably just your imagination. Maybe the water got splashed in your eye when you dumped it. They started to argue right there for a little bit. and she says, I stayed under them covers for 1 hour. I didn't care if I was sweating, she says. I was under them covers covering my head. And finally, when I, got back out, and then I saw it was really daylight, and then I walked out, and then I looked back over there, and that's where I've seen it. She says, I seen a white one. She says, are they white too? And I said, yeah, that's what people say. They're white ones too out there, silver ones, gray ones, and black ones, and brownish ones, and all
Reddish
different
ones
colors.
and brindle ones, and yeah, you get reports all different color,
Yeah.
even blonde ones.
Yeah. So, and then I told her that you're not doing anything about it. She said, "What am I going to do? You
Yeah.
go out there and say, hey, don't come around this place and stuff like that." I said, and she says, "Oh, you're just making fun of me." And that was the end of the conversation on that one. And, she was all mad about it.
Well, what does she think you're going to do? Go out there and put down a fly trap with super glue, and then when he gets stuck on it, you're going to pull him out of there and drag him
Yeah.
home, relocate him, or something.
Or shave it or something like that. So I don't know what she wanted me to do. Catch it and haul it away or something.
That's the
what we
impression I'm
do.
getting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you were like
the-
Marlon Perkins and Jim, and you had rocket powered nets that you could capture it with, and a tractor you could haul it out with.
Yeah.
I'd be willing to bet, since they haven't seen much of it since then, that it probably isn't really around there, and they don't need to worry about it.
Yeah. And here my cousin on that side, she says, early in the morning it comes up, right, before the sun comes up. You can see that thing standing right there at the edge of the wash.
Mm-hmm.
And then it'll go back down, and we have to be careful of what we, take outside, she says.
So they have seen the same one again then?
No, not the same one. She said
Yeah,
that
just
one
other ones.
was dark, yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's what she says, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I tell her, hey, your stepmom tells me about that. Every time I come here, she tells me that story. And then she goes, what does she want you to do about it? I said, I don't know, but it scared the wits out of her, I guess.
I guess you could put up a sign, Sasquatch, stay off the property, and hopefully they can read it.
Never mind the dog. She's scared of the caveman. The caveman is here, something like that. They want me to put up a sign like that.
Yeah, just put up a picture of yourself on a sign, and they'll be like, "Oh God, caveman's around here. You'll get video of us. Don't show up here."
Get out of here. So
good stuff.
That's what they tell me on that side too. Or they would, every time somebody sees me, then they would say, hey, I've seen this one over there when I was walking this way. So what did you do? I kept on walking. A good thing, I say. Just keep on walking. They won't bother you. They'll just look at you.
Yeah.
And then they say, oh yeah, it's like that. So that's the stories like that they say when I this place is called Mini Farms. It's like down in the valley. There's a mountain on one side, and then there's another mountain, and it kind of gradually goes in, and that's where Mini Farms is in Arizona. And here they have all kinds of stories, and then they even say that all the way about 13 miles to 15 miles up the south, they can still see them. little kids, they play on the wash banks and all of that. Then they say, oh, we saw something, a monster that, was walking towards us, or stuff like that, they would say. And we bolted out of there and we went home. And then there'll be like, somebody else will call you, and then they would say, when did it happen? Oh, about 2 hours ago. I said, why didn't you call me right when it was going on?
Yeah.
Well, you're still over 100 miles away from us, so it's going to take you about an hour and a half just to get here and then set up your camera. I said, I'm not going to set up my camera. I'm just going to jump off, just like those natives on TV. They just jump off while the horse is still going. I'll probably do that. I said,
Leave the truck to go crash somewhere, leap out of the door,
yeah,
go running
let it
after
stop somewhere.
There's nothing for it to crash into. It's all desert. Just let it roll till it stops.
Yeah. So that's what I tell them. But for the recent ones, my cousin brother to the west of me, I see, like I always say, I live on top of a mesa, and he lives kind of like at the edge of the mesa. And he says, I was working on my car one time, and I just heard a woof from my dog, he says. And I looked up, kind of got up from underneath the engine, and I looked that way, and here there was something that was moving. At first, I thought it was a bobcat, he says, but it was too big for a bobcat. And it kept looking at me sideways, and it's going down, minding its own business, but it kept looking at me like this, and it was going across right there. And I said, how far was it? He said, I'd say about maybe 100 feet or something like that. He said, it was just right there. He says, oh, I said, I didn't really look at its face because I was looking at walking the body on all fours. It's built, it walks like a bobcat. He says, you know how the bobcat kind of like has that bent torso right here, all of that, and then the legs, all of that, all natural. That's why I thought it was a bobcat. He says, but the head was huge. He says the head was all covered with hair and all of that. There was ears sticking out, but I didn't really see the face. I wasn't interested in that one. He says. And then he kept looking at me like this, and I kept looking at it, and it went down the hill. He says. Then I looked around. He says, oh, I'm out here by myself.
Yeah.
And then that was it, And then afterwards, he was thinking about it. And then he says he kind of like walked past his RV trailer just to see where it went down. And then there was nothing. And then he came back. And that's when he called me. Hey, there's something that crossed over here. So I bolted down there. I was flying in my truck. He lives about a mile from me.
Well, so you get there fast,
so I went over there, but then he has his gates and all of that. It's like a maze you have to go through to get to his house. Now, by the time I got to his house, it was probably about 15 minutes. And of course, like I said, I ran to where he said he showed me. He was walking back from where it went down, so I went over there, and then we tried looking for it right there. It was gone.
Yeah.
And he said he hears them at nights. They'll be going down like the mobile homes or RV trailers. They're kind of ribbed, right? Kind of like that. He said some of them, they put their hand all across and then they go brrr, like that, going back and forth.
Like a washboard. Brrr.
Uh-huh. They say that. So, or he said that, and he says they play with things right there, and then they play with my dog or something like that, and my dog doesn't say anything, he says. And I'm not gonna bring that dog in, he says. And like, oh, why not? He says, well, let Bigfoot have all the fleas and the ticks off my dog. I don't want it inside the house, he says. So, things like that, he says. And we laugh about it, we really crack up about it. But we never found it. And several times he said that they come around at night and then do that to his house, and then they're gone in the morning. But I don't leave anything out, he says. And they even open the doors to my cars, and then it goes ding, 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 like when I hear that, then I go outside and close the door and lock all the doors, he says. That's when I know that I didn't lock the doors, he says. So,
Because they know how to pull the latch and open them, right?
yeah.
Wasn't there somebody else? Seemed like you were telling me there was somebody around your, maybe further away from you, that was getting activity there this spring, that there was stuff going on around where they were at.
Oh man, there's a lot of people. There was some kids that were watching TV. I guess they have their curtain open, and one of them just happened to look back at behind them, and it was looking at them from there. They saw a real big face, and so those were all little girls. So they started screaming, and they said something was looking at them through the window, and I guess when it screamed, when those little girls screamed, that thing was, really into either the little kids or the TV. It was just really focused in on. But when those little girls screamed, he kind of pushed back on the window, kind of just got startled and kind of like that. And here, he cracked the window to their house. So I guess the mother goes out, what's wrong? What's going on? They were all crying, and there was something looking at us through the window. And then they came out and flashlighted around, because that's what we do. We don't just hide from it. We go out to it, because that's just how we're taught. If there's somebody outside, you go out there and meet them. You try not to have chaos inside your house.
Right.
So if you just go inside, you're just inviting them to have a challenge to go inside. That's what we're taught. So we go outside. I guess she went outside and started flashlighting around and all that, running all the way around. She called her mother. All of a sudden, there's like 10 families at that house. And then one of my nephew calls me over, and he says, "Hey, did you hear?" I said, "You hear what?" There was a Hus team that was down there looking at the little girls. I said, "Oh," and there's a whole bunch of people all around right there, flashlighting around. Everybody's cursing and then all of that. And I said, that thing is gone already. So, it's probably looking at them from the other side, and they across the canal or something like that. Already back over there.
At that point. So I guess the point with this is that this is just like a common thing. People pretty routinely, there's something weird on the property, help Caveman, help.
Yeah. Yeah, some of them, they say that, and then some of them, they just, run away and then turn around from afar about 1,000 feet and then take a picture and then try to post it on Facebook. And then everybody else is like, yeah, that's a man in a suit. And all that, and here Bigfoot be all just standing right there, posing or something like that. So, and then people be, they'll be saying, "Oh, that's a man in a suit. You just put him out there," and all of that. Everybody just goes to that, conclusion.
I don't know, a long time ago, we had pictures on the show from you where you were driving along and you saw one going across the plains, heading sort of uphill, off in the distance, and you were out there and you're heading back. I think you had already been out of your truck and you saw him going, and you were heading trying to catch up with him and get closer and get a picture of him. And as you were taking the pictures, he was getting further and further away from you.
Yeah.
First he's up by the truck, then you're finally up by the truck, and he's like 3 freaking times as far away as he was before, still in the same direction. And no matter how fast you freaking run, you can't get any ground on him. He's getting further away from you.
Yeah. See, a long time ago, they used to tell us run early in the morning. Like I was sharing the story about running 0 dark 30 at in the morning.
Yeah.
When the morning star comes up, that's when you're supposed to to go running, and that's how we were physically fit all the time. And nowadays, people just sleep up to 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and they don't even exercise, they don't run and all that. So the older you get, you how your bones, they kind of get stiffer and stiffer and stiffer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And here, you try to get a picture of it, and you're trying to run or walk fast and all that. Every time you put up, your camera, they'll be like way over there, and then all of a sudden, and the further and further they go.
Yeah.
And you try to take a picture, and you try to draw it in
Zoom in on it.
the zoom in on it on the computer, but it just gets blurry.
Yeah.
So then people joke about it, saying, Bigfoot is blurry, like that. So.
Well, remember when you were up here and we were all up at Coloma and everybody was gathering around the campfire talking, and we were talking about chasing these guys around and people getting pictures of them and stuff, and you went, some of them aren't that good at hiding. I got a picture of one. Looks like Andre the Giant trying to hide behind a potted plant. And everybody's like, what? And then, so you had that on your cell phone. You whipped it out and started showing everybody in the group. And I remember the reaction from everybody wasn't like, wow, that picture's blurry, or this is a great picture, or anything like that. It was always, they would just start laughing and they'd go, epic fail.
Yeah. Here, that thing was only about maybe 8 inches sticking up, and here's his big figure looking out behind there like that.
Yeah, like I said, it looked like Andre the Giant hiding behind a potted plant. You're like, dude, epic fail. And I remember as you were taking the picture too, you took the picture and then you started to walk, and as soon as you started walking, he tried to move and get further away so you couldn't see him. So you stopped,
Yeah.
and then he'd stop again.
They would do it. That's one thing they do. They look at you, and they know, how to scare you. Then they go make faces too, kind of like that, and then they do that. They show their teeth, or they'll kind of pucker up or stuff like that. They try to scare you like that. And here, when you're still looking at him, like, you in your mind, like in my mind, I would be thinking, what is it trying to do? It's making faces at me. And then it would have that long stare towards me, and then they would look to see what they could run to go hide behind there.
Yeah.
And then that's when I get my confidence, when they look back to see where they could run. And sometimes I would say, all of a sudden I would say, whoop! And they would get all scared. They would take off.
Caveman, quit scaring Bigfoot. Quit running around out there scaring those Sasquatches. That's why we can't get near them. You're out there scaring them.
And here, I did that to a coyote when I was going coyote hunting one time. It was bothering my grandma's sheep too at the time. This coyote was looking at the sheep down there, and I saw it laid down way up on top of one of the little hills. So I circled around it, and I crept up real slowly and softly right behind it, and it was, really on its belly like that, with his paws out, and just looking at the sheep, really focused in on it. And I walked up behind it, and it was just real close right here, down below, right below me. And I said, I grabbed its hind end, like that. And here, he just let out a yelp, right? That was the, and that coyote just fainted right there, just that, because I knew when he let out the yelp, he kind of went back, and I guess he saw a real big, large figure, which was me, right behind it, and it just fell over. And then I was looking at, hey, buddy, because that he's a spiritual person too.
Right.
So I said, buddy, I didn't mean to, make you faint. I was just trying to scare you. I said, yeah, look back at its butt, its turd fell out. Real.
You literally scared the shit out of him, Caveman.
Yeah. And its turd fell out. And I looked back at it, and his tongue was all in the dirt, like that. And I tried to wake it up. And then I started to do that, where you still have
See
a
if
pulse
there's a
like
pulse.
that. Yeah. So I started doing a good grabbing his head. It went all limp. And it did that.
Wow. That's weird.
And here, it died. Yeah, it died. I used to be that stealthy too. Even the badger really digging for a rabbit, I think, because there was a rabbit hole when I used to go by there. And here, next thing you know, there's a big hole. The badger's right there, and he was sniffing inside or something. I thought he saw me too as I was walking up to it real slowly, and it went back down in the hill, in that hole. And here I grabbed its tail too, and one of the legs, and I flung it way out there. That's the first time I heard a badger yell like ah, like that too, and then it hit the ground right there. After it came to its senses, it got mad and started.
Oh, I
running.
bet he did. Oh,
Yeah, I was running, booking it away from him and all that. And like I said, I used to be really fast,
yeah, you would need to be right about that.
So it did that. So I used to creep up on things like that. When the deers, they would come down from the mountain going through the Chaco Wash and the San Juan River, either side, then I would be sitting in the bush too, and then they would just go right by me, and then I would grab its leg like that, and then they would kind of just jerk at it. That's what they used to do, and that's how stealthy I was. I was out there, and I used to mess with all these animals, all of that too.
I got a weird badger story for you. You've heard of the guys down in the south that catch the catfish with their bare hands. They noodle them. They get right in the water and they reach underneath the logs and then holes in the edge of the river bank and reach around until they find a big catfish. It chomps down on them. Then they pull them out and they got catfish. Well, that's noodling. Well, there's these idiots in Wisconsin that tried badger noodling. And so you would think only one idiot would have ever tried reaching into a badger's hole with the badger facing them. Because what happens is the badger grabs onto your hand and doesn't let go. So either you pull your hand off or you stand there until you die of starvation, exposure, and blood loss. And again, you would think only one idiot would have tried badger noodling. But they actually have 3 examples of that in Wisconsin where idiots tried badger noodling and ended up dead. And as long as we're on the subject of Wisconsin, there's a park up there called Estland Park. And the guy that named it, this was about 100 years ago, and donated it, was his property, and there was a giant earthwork pyramid there. He named it that is because it reminded him of the pyramids down in Central America that the Aztec had made. So it was his theory that maybe the Aztecs made that. Well, now, interestingly, according to their oral history, the Aztec actually came from way up north and did used to live in the north and then gradually moved south. And one of their medicine men had a vision that they needed to move the whole tribe south, and they would continue to go south until they came to a place where they saw an eagle with a snake in its beak that was sitting on a bristly branch. And and this was Mexico. This is, when they went down, they saw this, and that's still the emblem of the flag in Mexico. That's where that came from. So interesting thing here is that most of the scienticians out there will try and tell you that the natives came across at during the last ice age, when there was so much water locked up in ice that the sea level dropped and you could walk across what's ocean bottom now. And there was a strip of land there called Beringia. and they're claiming all the natives that are here on the continent came across at that point. But what it sounds like from the oral traditions of you guys actually came across from the Ice Age before that, like more like 20 or 24,000 years ago, and you got kind of held up in the northern part of the continent because the rest of the continent was swarming with frickin' giants. So until they started warring with each other and wiping each other out, you couldn't really move south. Have I got that part of the story right?
Not really. We never, we don't have crossing into another land. We don't have any stories like that.
So your stories are that you were always here and you were underground for a while the bad stuff was going.
Yeah, we've gone through different stages of evolution, starting from just the way these the best guess people, the science people, they say, the archaeologists, that there were amphibians and reptiles and insects and animals and birds, and on top of this is now the fifth world, the silver world, or the glittering world. See, it came from the black, the blue, the yellow, and then the white, and then the glittering world. That's how we are taught. And so everybody else, were up here. There were more monsters out here, and then this is where man, the first man, like for us, it's a woman, and was made, or was conceived on top of the world, the glittering world. Everybody else is, everything else down below is insects, animals, reptiles, amphibians, and all of that. So we consider them, like spirits, deities, like even for coyotes, even dogs. Dogs is like the same story as Babylon, the story that how the language was changed. That's the dog story, kind of like in the same way. And because they used to gossip, they used to know, because all the barking that they do, either to say get away, or there's somebody, they alert you on stuff. We as humans, think about it like that. But a long time ago, they would say, oh, there's a person coming, there's a person coming, there's a person coming. And then the owner of the house would come out and say, oh, where? And they're right there, he's hiding behind a hill, or something like that.
Yeah.
Or then they would start saying they would trot all over the place, or then they would sniff out stuff, and then they would say, oh, this person's scent is right here, and then this other person's scent, this woman, there's this man's scent over here, and then there's the woman's scent over here, and this scent was your wife, and stuff like that. They used to gossip all that, back to the their master. So they just decided that there was just too much information going on, and a lot of it was even the dogs had a sense of humor. They would tell on somebody saying, "Oh, your wife is going with that other man," and then the man, they would tell the wife, "Your man is running around with that woman." Then they would get a kick out of it, and there will be people fighting and all of that. And so their language was changed because of that. So they were just made to say woof, woof, or bow wow, or whatever. That's what, we're taught. So going back to the land like that, see, that's why we always say big brother to some certain animals, like the bear, the cougar, or the wolf, or some brother, or something like that, sister, or grandmother. We kind of see the grandmother as like the reptiles, the reptiles, like the lizards and all of that. Even how the green lizard is, to us it's called the blue turquoise boy, and as the green lizard has all these different colors on the neck, like that. So the Navajos view it as having necklaces of all different colors. So it's a deity, even though it's just running around out there. It's a deity. It's a spirit. It was way. It was here way before us as humans. That's what we're taught. So, somebody that's just coming out doesn't has a closed mind, saying this is, it's this way and all of that. We'll never understand. But if you know you hang around me, I bet you I make you understand and tell you stories about it. But then there's these things that all these animals we call brothers, sisters, grandfather,
Right.
father.
Different
and all
animal
of that.
nations too. Most of the
Yeah,
native tribes
different.
talk about that, animal
Yeah.
nations.
And
Question
all
I
of
got
that.
for you now is, when you guys were underground, were you just there on your own, or did you have help from the ant people? Because some of the tribes down there in the Southwest said the ant people actually helped them when they were underground.
See, that's one thing. The ants are viewed as just the army.
Mm-hmm.
The way that my grandfather used to say was, it's like the Roman legions
Yeah.
and the Chinese armies. All these, they would just march and march and march, and then they get into a battle, and then last man standing or something like that. They'll get that far, or they'll separate. They'll pick up their injured and all of that, take them home. Of course, the ants are doing it for survival and all
Yeah.
of that, but that's how they're viewed, as like the Roman legions or the Chinese armies. A whole bunch of them all at one time coming, and they'll take over anything. They say they'll conquer.
Right,
And
but I'm not
that's
talking about like the ant nation in insects. I'm talking about the ant people. That some of the Southwest natives, yeah, and they've got the same legend as you guys. They were underground for a while, but their legend is that they had help. The ant people were actually helping them, and the way they describe them, they look like little gray aliens.
yeah. That's one thing that they always say. They're the ones that brought now knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that brought knowledge, battle, armor, and all of that. They were great thinkers. They could build stuff,
Right.
and they're the ones that are being kind of like the ones that build the pyramids.
Mhm.
Nowadays the ones that we see, and their anthill is just the same.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's like that. That's why they wore armor, hard armor, and in order to have the armor, they in traditional history, those ants, their antennas were considered as feathers.
Huh.
Like thistles that came out,
Yeah.
and that's what they're depicted as. And all the rest is armor, but they would always be the one to have food, always have a place to go to, and
Yeah.
take you out of danger, so to speak, like helping
Right.
the other animals.
Right.
But people themselves were not born until the surface world. Like I said, these ants were down below. They came up
Mm-hmm.
like that. So that's all. All that they would take you. They would take you to a place where they can protect you. They'll
Right.
take you to a place where they will feed you. Like maybe there's a dead carcass, and then you eat it or something like that. They'll take you to food. In that way, the Navajos view it as the ants helping them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're the most evil people on the face of the earth, because they have too much knowledge. That's just like Leonardo da Vinci. He was killed for his knowledge, or the ostracized and all of that, and it's like that.
Mm-hmm. I'm just kind of curious about that whole thing. If you know, because I know a couple of the tribes talk about they were on the surface and something bad happened, and the ant people came and took them under the ground for a while, and then when everything was safe, they let them go back on the surface again. And then there's other tribes in other parts of the continent that all talk about being up north and moving south, or moving from one part of the country to the other. Apparently, I think it was the Cherokee at one point, thousands and thousands of years ago. I think were the ones that lived out in California, and there was some kind of big eruption or something, and they moved east, and that's how they ended up where they're at now. And then the Chippewa and Ojibwe actually started way further east than where they are right now. And their leader had a vision that they should keep going west until they run into an area with lakes where there was food growing on the water. And when they got to where the wild rice was, they stopped there. That's northern Minnesota. So all these tribes have different legends about how they moved from one place to another and what made them move there. And some of the further northern ones talked about when they showed up, they couldn't go any further south on the continent because too many dangerous animals and frickin' giants were trying to kill them. So until that situation kind of resolved itself, there wasn't a whole lot they could do. So it's real interesting, you know. And you guys have the legend that you actually had a big war with the giants and teamed up with some other tribes and drove them north, apparently across the Bering Strait, back into Asia, and left part of your tribe there to keep it so they wouldn't come back again.
Yeah. See, all of that is in a ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
So that one, you know, that says that they were starting something similar as Sodom and Gomorrah, like that. It was starting to get bad, and here they were driven off. These other tribes too, you know, they kind of participated in it, and they drove them off north. That's the reason why on certain flags they would have the north as black, the color black, because you know all the bad stuff was driven that way. So they went through the big trees which went up into the heavens. That's what they say. And
That
then
sounds
they
a
went
lot
further.
like the sequoias of the redwood forest or something.
Yes,
North of
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of that, and then all the way up north to. They thought they had made a detour somewhere because it turned out to be all white, and there was they looked to the left and there were monsters, you know, coming up from the sea. They thought it was the water monster that was following them. So, but they were still these evil people. They were driven all the way up north. They thought they were in the east because east represents white, you know. So they went from there, and then, but then they started to see that it was cold. In the east, it was, you know, just harmony, nothing, everything's perfect. So this wasn't like that until they got to the edge of the land. And there, what I can compare that to is Moses taking his people out of across the Red Sea or something like that. That
Right.
happened, and but it was from Alaska. That, you know, nowadays Alaska, Nome,
Yeah.
all that area. It's closest to Russia. They found out that there was an island right there. They said in between Russia and the United States or Alaska. So these people, some of them swam across, some of them made boats and all of that. They had with them, and they with, even with the rafts, and then they got to there. But then them people that were being exiled saw another land way across in the west. So then they went that way again because they were just getting killed while being exiled from this land, the North Continent, and all of that, and going that way. So once they all got out to that west land, it was cold, yes, and all the ones that were the warriors and everything, they went that way with them, following them, and chased them out to the other land. So they started the ones with the no skins. They went up even towards, like more west, kind of northwest, went up into the mountains and the hills and all of that. And that's where they survived. And then from there, the other ones, they tried to veer off right there. And they just had them stay right there, And then the ones that they pushed more forward, those were the great thinkers. And those were the ones that were supposed to perish in the sands right there, the Saharas.
Mhm.
So all of that, they were supposed to perish right there. But then the other ones, the very aggressive ones, the ones that, didn't have the wild people, more or less, like didn't want to go with the flow of authoritarian rule or stuff like that. Those were all put to the edge of the other ones. They couldn't go no further. On the way back, they found that the people that were supposed to perish in the sand had dug up water. They had built stones and all of that. They started copying what was, like to say, the South American pyramids.
Right.
They started to copy them. The ones that were put at the edge of the other land they became Africans and then all of that. And then as it started going up, there were the ones that moved off kind of into islands and all of that. Those became like Malaysian, Thailand, and all that, all the Chinese and all that, all the way back up to China. And they didn't want nobody to go back into where they came from. So they set some tribes out there, to protect the entrance right there.
To stop them from coming back again.
Yeah, to stop them from coming back. So then they did that, and now we know them as Mongolians, Tibetans, and all of that. And the other ones, they came back. They went across. They went back across. This is the second crossing. First, It was the other way, and then back this way, and all that going on, and all the way back. They kind of got lost in the Canadian forests, and they went as far as Ojibwe, and all of that. And they came back to the Four Sacred Mountains, where they were always told they were from, and then the other tribes that lived around there. So these the Apaches and the Navajos, they have this story.
Make sure that you're kind to everyone. Safety first, last, and always. Pay it forward. Don't be mean to people if you don't have to be. Don't flip off the mountain giant. Don't poke Dogman with a stick. Don't punt the puck, would you? And for God's sake, whatever you do not hug the Wookiee.